Hi there, this is Cory Doctorow, and this is my first attempt at a podcast. Up until now, I've been a little reluctant to try doing this because of the itinerant nature of my life. It means that I'm rarely in a quiet place where I could hope to record something like this without getting a lot of ambient noise in the background. Hotel rooms, tube stations, uh, airport lounges, and my noisy flat in London are kind of the best I've got going for me. Um, but the other day I was in Montreal at a conference and I was talking to the very clever Mark Pesci, and Mark said, "Well, you could record a podcast with all that ambient sound, and it probably wouldn't be too bad. In fact, it'd be kind of interesting to be able to hear what was going on in the background while you were doing your thing." The idea is that I want to read bits of stories that I'm working on in serial form, a bit and then a bit more and then a bit more. And for me, it'd be actually kind of cool, I think, to be able to go back in years to come and hear what was going on in the airport lounge or the friend's apartment or wherever I happened to be when I was recording. I'm in Portland right now in a friend's basement. His kids have just gone to bed and he's upstairs tucking them in and getting ready to go give a talk on DRM at Hewlett Packard Labs in Corvallis before heading out again. I'm going to read a little bit of a story called The Siege, which is the novella or novelette that I've been working on long haul flights, writing 2 to 5,000 words on every long haul flight segment I fly. It's been going really well at that rate, and it's kind of grounded in a family reunion my family took this summer in St. Petersburg, which used to be Leningrad in Russia, which used to be the Soviet Union. My grandmother was raised there, and when she was 13, the siege of Leningrad began. This was the 900-day siege during which the Nazis tried to starve out the Leningradians. And a fair bit of craziness on the part of the Russian military compounded this. And the people who were trapped inside lived through a horror that is just astonishing to contemplate. And as we walked around the streets of St. Petersburg, my grandmother pointed out the places where she'd hauled corpses and tossed them out of upper story windows because she and the other people in the corpse detail were too weak to carry them down the stairs, and places where she dug ditches and so on. And it really hit me. So a friend of mine asked me to write a story for an anthology of optimistic science fiction, which is kind of an odd match for that inspiration, but I think I am managing to write an optimistic story about the siege of Leningrad, maybe. I guess that's up to you to decide, or more to the point, for the editor to decide. So I'm going to read the first little bit, and then I'll read a little bit later on. I hope to read at least one chunk a week, and possibly a little more, 10-15 minute reading each week. You can tune into the podcast, or you can download individual MP3s. And without further ado, I will read the first 10 minutes worth of After the Siege. The day the siege began, Valentine was at the cinema across the street from her building. The cinema had only grown the night before, and when she got out of bed and saw it there, all gossamer silver supports and brave sweeping candy apple red curves, she begged Mata and Popa to let her go. She knew that all the children in her building would spend the day there. Didn't the pack of them explore each fresh marvel as a group? The week before it had been the clever flying cars that swooped past each other with millimeters to spare, like pigeons ripping over your head. Before that it had been the candy forest where the trees sprouted bonbons and sticks of rock, where every boy and girl in the city had been there, laughing and eating until their sides ached. Before that, the swarms of robot insects that had gathered up every fleck of litter and dust and spirited all the way to the edge of town, where they'd somehow chewed it up and made factories out of it, brightly colored and airy as aviaries. Before that, fish in the river. Before that, the new apartment buildings. Before that, the new hospitals. Before that, the new government offices. Before that, the revolution, which Valentine barely remembered. She'd been a little kid of 10 then, not a big girl of 13 like now. All she remembered was a long time when she'd always been a little hungry, when everything was gray and dirty, and when Mata and Popa whispered angrily at each other when they thought she slept, and while her little brother Trover had cried thin, sickly cries all night, which made her angry too. This cine was amazing, the greatest marvel yet as far as she was concerned. She and the other little girls crowded into one of the many balconies and tinkered with the controls for it until it lifted free. How they'd whooped and sailed off to its own little spot under the high swoop of the dome. From there the screen was a little distorted, but they could count the bald spots on the old war heroes' heads as they nodded together in solemn congress, waiting for the films to start. From there they could spy on the boys who were making spitball mischief that was sure to attract a reprimand, though for now the airborne robots were doing a flawless job of silently intercepting the boys' missiles before they disturbed any of the other viewers. The film wasn't very good in Valentine's opinion. The first one was all about the revolution, as if she hadn't heard enough about the revolution. It was all they talked about in school, for one thing, and her parents, the quantities, the positive quantities of times they'd sat her down to explain the revolution, which was apparently one of their duties as bona fide heroes. This was better than most, though, because they made it with a game, and it was a game that Valentine played quite a lot and thought was quite good. She recognized the virtual city modeled on her own city, the Avatar's dance moves taken from the game too, along with the combat sequences and the scary zombies that had finally given rise to the revolution. That much she knew, and that much they all knew. Without the zombies, the revolution would never have come. Zombieism, the need to cure it, had outweighed every other priority. 3 governments had promised that they'd negotiate better prices for zombieism drugs, and 3 governments had failed, and in the end the cabinet had been overrun by zombies who torn 3 MPs to bits and infected 7 more, and the crowd had carried the Prime Minister out of her office and put her in a barrel and driven nails through the barrel and rolled it down the river bank into the river, something so horrible and delicious that Valentine often thought about it like you poke a sore tooth with your tongue. After that, the revolution, and a new prime minister who wouldn't negotiate the price of zombieism drugs. After that, a prime minister who built zombieism drug factories right there in the city, giving away the drug in spray and pill and needles. From there, it was only a matter of time until everything was being made right in the city. Copies of movies and copies of songs, and copies of drugs and copies of buildings, and cars and you name it, and that was the revolution. And Valentine thought it was probably a good thing for everyone, except that old PM whom they'd put in the barrel. The next movie was much better, and Valentine and Lisa, who was her best friend that week, put their arms around each other's shoulders and watched it avidly. It was about a woman who was in love with 2 men, and the men hated each other, and there was fighting and glorious kissing and sophisticated cutting insults, and oh, they dressed so well. The audio was dubbed over from English, but that was okay. The voice actors they used were very good. After the second showing, she and her friends allowed their seats to lower and set off for the concession stand, where they found the beaming proprietors of the cinema celebrating their opening day with chocolates and thick sandwiches and fish pies and bottles of brown beer for the adults and bottles of fizzy elderflower for the kids. Valentine saw the cute boy who Lisa liked and tripped him so that he practically fell in Lisa's lap, and that set the 2 of them to laughing so hard they nearly didn't make it back to their seats. The next picture barely had time to start when it was shut off, and the lights came up, and one of the proprietors stepped in front of the screen, talking into his phone, which must have been dialed into the cine sound system. "Comrades, your attention, please. We have word that the city is under attack by our old enemies. When they have bombed the East Quarter, and many are dead. More bombs are expected soon." They all spoke at once, horrified non-words that were like a panic that made Valentine want to cover her ears. "Please, comrades," the speaker said. He was about 60, and getting a new head of hair, but he had the look of the old ones, who'd lived through the zombieism, a finger or 2 bent at a funny angle by a secret policeman, a waddle under the chin of skin loosened by some dark year of starvation. "Please, we must be calm. If there are shelters in your apartment building and you can walk there in less than 10 minutes, you should walk there. If your building lacks shelters, or if it would take more than 10 minutes to go to your building's shelter, you may use some of the limited shelter space here. The seats will lower in order 2 at a time to prevent a rush, and when yours reaches the ground, please leave calmly and quickly and get to your shelter." Lisa clutched at her arm. "Vala, my building is more than 10 minutes' walk. I'll have to stay here. Oh, my poor parents, they'll think you're safe with me, Lise," Valentine said, hugging her. "I'll stay with you, and both our parents can worry about us together." They headed for the shelter together, white-faced and silent in the slow-moving crowd that shuffled down the steps into the first basement. the second basement, then the shelter below that. A war hero was handing out masks to everyone who entered, and he had to go and find more child-sized ones for them, so they waited patiently in the doorway. "Valentine, you don't belong here. Go home and leave room for we who need it." It was her worst enemy, Rita, who had been her best friend the week before. She was red in the face and pointing and shouting. "She lives across the street. You see how selfish she is. Across the street here's her own shelter, and she would take a spot away from her comrades, send them walking through the streets." The hero silenced her with a sharp gesture and looked hard at Valentine. "Is it true?" "My friend is scared," she said, squeezing Lisa's shaking shoulder. "I will stay with her." "You go home now," the hero said, putting one of the child-sized masks back in the box. "Your friend will be fine, and you'll see her in a few minutes when they sound the all clear. Hurry now." His voice and his look brooked no argument. So Valentine fought her way up the stairs. So many headed for the shelter, and out the doors, and when she stepped out, it was like a different city. The streets, always so busy and cheerful, were silent. No air cars flew overhead. It was silent, silent like the ringing in your ears after you turn your headphones up too loud and then turn them off. It was so weird that a laugh escaped her lips, though not one of mirth, more like a scared laugh. She stood a moment longer, and then there was a sound like faraway thunder. A second later, a little wind. On its heels, a bigger wind, icy cold and then hot as the oven when you open the door, nearly blowing her off her feet. It smelled like something dead or something deadly. She ran as fast as she could across the street, pounding hell for leather to her front door. Just as she reached it, there was a much louder thunderclap, one that lifted her off her feet and tossed her into the air, spinning her around. She spun around and around, and she saw the brave red dome of the city disintegrate, crumble to a million shards that began to rain down on the street. Then the boom dropped her hard on the pavement, and she saw no more. So here endeth the reading, as they say. That was the first part of After the Siege. I'll be back no later than a week from now, I hope, with the next section, a comparable piece. Thank you all for listening this far. This has been my first podcast, and I'm Cory Doctorow. Good night.